Hello, everyone. Buenos dias. Or is it buenos tardes? Buenos tardes. I am from California, and I learned to speak Spanish a long time ago, and then I forgot it also a long time ago. So I'm going to speak in English, and I'd like to share with you some new thinking that I've been doing about emotional intelligence. How many people have read Emotional Intelligence? Here, okay. So some of this may be familiar, but for some people it'll be new. And also, I've just finished, I'm very excited about this, my first digital book. It's only available online, and it's called Emotional Intelligence in the Brain, New Insights. Because when I finished the book, Emotional Intelligence or Social Intelligence, my more recent book, I didn't stop thinking about it. And so my understanding of emotional intelligence has kept growing and kept evolving. In emotional intelligence, I talked about a basic set of life skills, how we handle ourselves, how we handle our relationships. And it was based on new findings in brain science. So my new book is even more recent discoveries in brain science. For example, now it used to be, when I first started talking about emotional intelligence, psychologists would say, academic psychologists, well, is there such a thing as emotional intelligence? Is it really different? Now we know what part of the brain, and it's a different part of the brain than IQ, what part of the brain handles emotional intelligence. And that explains why it's so important in making decisions in our personal lives and in our professional lives, in our businesses. Because there are two parts of the brain. There's the top part, the neocortex. This is the thinking brain. And then deep in the center of the brain, the emotional centers. And, school is designed around the fiction or the illusion that all that matters is your thinking brain. But anybody who lives a life knows that what really matters is your emotional life, isn't it? And what's very interesting now is the new data showing that being intelligent about emotions is what helps someone be successful in life, in their relationships, in their career, and in business. Because when we make a decision, should I marry this person? Should I keep my job or leave it and take a different job? What strategy should our company follow going into the future? It doesn't matter what decision. There are two parts of the brain involved. One is the thinking brain, the part that's thinking of the problem. And then there's the part that contains our entire life wisdom, everything we've learned going through life. It's an ancient part of the brain. It's lower in the brain, very deeply connected to the emotional centers. And as we go through situations in life, it extracts decision rules. It learns something. When I said that, that really was effective. When I did that, that didn't work. And it saves this information for us in a part of the brain that doesn't have access to words, to the thinking brain. It actually has a lot of connection to the gut. So if you want to know, should I marry this guy or not, you have to ask your heart, not your head, right? And it's actually, that makes a lot of sense from the brain point of view, because what you're doing is tapping into everything your life has taught you up to that moment. And it gives you the answer as a sense, as a feeling. Feels right. Doesn't feel right. Another thing that's really newly discovered, I go into in this new book. It's called, the book is called the Emotional Intelligence in the Brain, New Insights. It has to do with creativity, solving creative problems, coming up with breakthrough innovations. And what we've discovered is that there are two halves of the brain. This has been well known, but they operate differently when we're tackling a creative problem. The left side of the brain, this is the logical side, the rational side. It's a very good thinker, but it has very few connections to other parts of the brain. The right side of the brain is more holistic. It takes in the total picture. It's not linear like the left, and it has extensive connections throughout the brain. So if you have a creative problem you're trying to solve, there are three steps. First, you have to frame the problem. Say what it is. What answer are you trying to come to? Second, we tried very hard to come up with that answer rationally. Very often, that's not enough. Then the third step seems very counterintuitive, but the best thing to do is forget about it. Just leave it aside and do something else. The reason is that your right hemisphere will keep going on the problem, and it will make connections throughout the brain. And a creative solution comes when you put two or more things together that have not been connected. And that's what the brain will do. So the aha, the big breakthrough comes so often when people are walking the dog, taking a shower, not just pounding away at the problem. And that's because of the way the brain is organized. There's another finding I find very important, and it helped me understand the difference between my wife and I. It has to do with empathy, particularly when you're solving a problem. You know, men and women are wired differently in the brain when it comes to how to handle stress. For men, we get a lot of stress hormones and we want to fight or flee. Women have another set of wiring that adds something to that picture. It's called tend and befriend. Women not only have that, but they also want to talk about it, to think it over. Is that right? Yeah. And that's something men just don't do so naturally. And, you know, I always wondered, you know, my wife just wants to talk about it. And, like, I don't really feel like, you know, it's just between you and me. Right? So a new finding, this is also in the new book, is really important. It shows that for men, when you're talking to someone well, let me start with women. When a woman is talking to someone who's upset about something, her brain tunes in with emotional empathy. Emotional empathy means that a part of the brain which works like a neural radar zooms into the other brain, and it creates an invisible channel, brain to brain, where you feel with the other person. And men have the same wiring, but we do something else. After we get the initial feeling, we switch to another part of the brain which wants to solve the problem right away. So men tend to be problem solvers, while women are still really immersing in the feeling and trying to understand, talk it over, and learn about it. So I hope this helps you in your relationships. It's helped me in mine. So let me just review for you a few other things that I think are really important. One is that we now understand that children's brains are growing anatomically until the mid-20s. And the part of the brain that's growing the most is the emotional and social centers. And the brain shapes itself through repeated experiences. The more we have an experience, the stronger the circuitry gets. So what this means is that as parents, we are wiring our children's brains just by everyday interactions. Every time a child's upset, for example, and a parent tunes in, says, "Oh, what's the trouble? Can I help you?" You're helping that child learn a few things. Empathy, that people can understand the inner world of someone else. Very important lesson. You may feel that way now, but you can take some control. You can calm down. And we do that through the very normal interactions in life. But what we're doing is molding a brain. We're sculpting a brain. And in a society that has a lot of problems with youth, you know, drugs or alcohol or violence or crime, one of the ways to reduce that is to bring into schools what's called social emotional learning. These are programs that fit very seamlessly into the ordinary academic curriculum, but which teach the kids the lessons they need for life. You know, starting at age 5 and going all the way through school till they're 18. And the lessons are taught over and over as children understand more in a developmentally appropriate way. As their cognition gets better, for example, they can think more about, well, what made me feel that way? What could I do to to handle my distress? So, for example, For 6-year-olds, the teacher might present a problem. What would you do if you think that somebody stole your pencil? Well, what would make it worse? What would make it better? This is social problem solving, very important for kids. And at aged 9, the teacher might tell the kids, what if you were in a school play and you had stage fright and you didn't want to do, you're too scared to go up? What could you do? What would make it better? What would make it worse? Or for a teenager, how can you say no to drugs and keep your friends? These are vital questions for kids. And I have to tell you that kids love this course because it deals with the melodramas that matter the most to them. And kids who are preoccupied by emotional troubles don't have the attentional capacity they need to learn. The more emotionally upset a child is through the school years, the less brain capacity, the less bandwidth they can bring to what the teacher is telling them. So it's vitally important in terms of schools being effective to help kids know how to manage their own inner life and get along with each other. So we've just published some data, some associates of mine, on more than 200 programs in schools. Some schools had it, some didn't. And it turns out the schools that have the programs compared to the ones that don't, they have 10% on average more positive behavior. That means that they're paying attention in class, they're not cutting class, they're actually going to school, they like going to school, they feel someone at school cares about them, they have a very positive feeling about class, and the teachers love it because they don't have to spend so much time controlling kids. The kids are controlling themselves, they're enjoying themselves. Also, antisocial behavior goes down. All of the problems of the teen years, aggression in schools and so on, down 10%. Down more in the schools that need it the most. And then the best thing is academic achievement scores go up 11%. Kids can learn better. So I'm becoming a big advocate of these programs. I don't know if it's possible here in your country, but I'd really urge you, if you have any ability to promote these programs, to do so. So that was what I wanted to share with you. I'd love to take any questions you might have. Just raise your hand. Yes, sir.
You mentioned there's a physical space in the brain that contains, let's call it, emotional cells. So if you're born with this, as an adult, can you develop more of this capacity, or is it just given and
Sure.
there's nothing else to do about it?
That's a very important question. And the answer is it's never too late to improve. The reason is that each of us is, because of our genetics, have some givens. But there's a big misunderstanding about genes. And that is, if you have a gene, it doesn't mean that that gene expresses itself. The environment determines that. And also, another important fallacy is that many people believe, and this once was taught in schools, we're born with a huge amount of brain cells, and then we gradually lose them until we die. That's not true. That's the good news. We actually generate 10,000 new brain cells every day. Those brain cells go to where they're needed, particularly where we're learning. So if you're practicing something with emotional intelligence in that domain, like managing your feelings better, or listening better, or trying to improve empathy, those brain cells are going to that new circuitry. And the more we practice, the stronger that circuitry gets. So yes, the answer is that we can recruit more brain cells for the part of the brain that governs emotional intelligence. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Which companies do you think best apply emotional intelligence nowadays? And I have two questions. And the second one is, if you're not one of them, how can you start to be one of applying emotional intelligence?
Well, there are many companies that are explicitly applying emotional intelligence. There was a survey some years back in the States, the American Society for Training and Development found that 80% of large companies incorporate some aspect of emotional intelligence, hiring, promoting, training, sometimes all three. One company, for example, that's been very successful using it for recruiting is Southwest Airlines. I don't know if you've ever been to the States and flown Southwest Airlines was the first to make people happy in miserable conditions. And the way they did it was by having really nice people work there. So it was kind of a fun experience. And that was because they were explicitly recruiting for emotional intelligence. Another company that includes it, I don't think it exists here, it's called Whole Foods Market. It's the biggest natural foods chain. And they see it, their business model is that emotionally intelligent team members delight customers who come back and repeat business. That's the business model. So you need to encourage and hire for emotional intelligence. So I actually don't know every company. I'm not in the business. I just write about this. Your question was, what could you do to make a company more emotionally intelligent? And it depends who you are, what influence you have at the company. So let's say you're head of HR. Then you can be explicit. You can hire for it. You can promote for it. You can let people know this matters here. If you're a CEO or a high-level leader, you can help that initiative by talking about it, by making it explicit. This isn't just HR. We really are going to reward this. I've seen, Visa asked me to come and talk to I guess I talked to several thousand people on TV, and also the headquarters. And the reason was that they were starting an initiative to make it explicit that they wanted to encourage this kind of behavior. So I think that's very important. How you introduce it matters. Who advocates it matters. It's like any new initiative.
Can you give us some sort of formula or tips or maybe tools to handle a stressful situation through emotional intelligence that we can apply?
How do you handle a stressful situation? This is something I go into in much more detail in the new book, Emotional Intelligence in the Brain. When we're feeling distress, the emotional centers are highly active. But there's an area in the executive center of the brain, which is just behind the forehead, on the left side, which is able to say no to those signals, to inhibit it. And we can actually strengthen this center. We can make it stronger so that in those moments when we need it the most, it will be able to contain the emotional upset or to help us recover more quickly. The key to resilience, to handling stress well, is not that we don't get upset. Everybody gets upset. It's how long we stay upset. Some people will live with that for weeks. And the reason is you keep ruminating about it, keep thinking about it. That's like living it all over again. So the brain keeps generating these stress hormones. If you're resilient, you drop it. You go on to the next thing. And what allows you to do this is this area here. There's a method called mindfulness. Mindfulness is an adaptation of a meditation technique for everyday life, where you learn to focus on your inner experience or your breath, and every time your mind wanders, you bring it back. Or if your mind does wander to something upsetting, you stay with that, but you don't judge it, you don't react to it, you just note it. And this trains your mind to change your relationship to stress. And it's the changed relationship that's going to help you handle it better.
How can I assess my level of emotional intelligence?
Well, the first thing not to do is ask yourself. And the reason is, emotional intelligence is 4 things. The first part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. If you're low in self-awareness, you're going to give the wrong answer. People who are low in self-awareness, if you ask them to evaluate themselves on emotional intelligent behavior, and then you ask people who know them very well to evaluate themselves, there's a huge gap between how they see themselves and how other people see themselves. So the best thing to do is to ask someone who knows you well, who will be honest with you, who you respect and whose opinion you trust. That's a little difficult to do. So many corporations use what's called a 360-degree instrument. I designed one called the Emotional and Social Competence Inventory. This is for leadership development. And it describes what emotional intelligence looks like listening well and so on, and asks people to evaluate you, but you don't know who evaluated it. They do it anonymously, and you get an average of 10 at a time. That way, 10 opinions. That way you can get an honest answer. So there was a Scottish poet, John Burns, I forget his first name, who said, "Oh, that the gods would give us the gift to see ourselves as others see us." That's what it takes, yes.
You just mentioned that your latest book is in digital format only. And my question is, do you think that this so-called screen world, you know, like interconnections, are they modifying or changing our emotional abilities within each other?
Oh, this is such an important question, particularly for kids, is what's the effect, the social effect, or the effect on society, and the effect on children's development of relating to a screen rather than a person for so many hours of the day. I think that's the real downside, is that emotional intelligence abilities are taught in life. They're taught in being with other people. The brain is designed to take in these lessons face to face or by watching other people. If you're watching a screen or you're playing, what is it called, Angry Birds? Do you have that game? Some kids are addicted to, not just kids are addicted to Angry Birds. You're, in a sense, wasting valuable time where you could be learning these lessons. So it would predict a certain growing deficiency in some social skills, I would think. The other problem is that the more we communicate online, like on Facebook, you can have contact with many, many more friends at one time on Facebook, but the contact is thin. It's not as rich as going out for a coffee or a beer with that person. Not nearly. And our bodies and our brains need that human contact. So to the extent that it replaces that, I think we're diminished. I think we lose something. There's another problem, and that is email. The social brain, which locks into the other person's brain, tells you unconsciously, instantly, the way the person you're with when you're face to face just reacted to what you just did or said, and so you better do this and not do that. Online, you don't have that feedback loop. So it doesn't tell you you better do this or and not that. So you're free to do not that. And if you're upset, if you're angry, you'll sit at the keyboard and type out an email furiously and hit send, and then you think, oh no, what did I just say? That's the problem, is it disinhibits, is the technical term. So these are problems we need to figure out. I don't have easy solutions. Of course, there are many advantages to working together and so on online, but we have to be aware of what some of the dangers are too. We just established scientifically that there must be. I think our time is at an end. Thank you very much.